I have been to a good many of these evenings over the years. The Federation puts one on every autumn, a fundraiser for the Widows' Fund and the Welfare Trust, held in the Alderton Civic Function Room with its smell of old carpet and borrowed candelabras. There are speeches and a raffle and a cold buffet, and a hired pianist who plays through the soup course while nobody listens. The tables are set with tea light holders in little glass jars, and there are always too few napkins and too many name cards placed incorrectly. I have attended 11 of them as a trustee, and I confess I have never found one particularly memorable. They are good-natured and a little weary, like most things the service produces for itself in middle age, carried forward out of loyalty rather than expectation. I should say at the outset that I was not expecting the evening of the 4th of November to be any different. I had come straight from a long afternoon of committee work, my reading glasses were giving me trouble, and I was seated between a recently retired superintendent who wanted to talk about his loft conversion and a police chaplain who had unfortunately discovered I could not place his name. I was grateful for the wine and resigned to the rest. Roy Aldous I had spotted the moment I came in. He was not hard to miss if you knew what to look for, though most people that evening would not have known to look at all. He was in the corridor outside the function room when I arrived, a large, still man in a white shirt and pressed dark trousers, his jacket folded over one arm, checking that the fire door was propped correctly. Roy had been a sergeant with our division for 26 years before he retired, and then, 3 years after that, he had taken on the caretaking and facilities role at the Alderton station because, as he had told me once, he did not know what else to do with his mornings. I had tried to persuade him otherwise. He told me he liked the quiet and the purpose and the fact that nobody expected much of him. I understood him well enough by then not to argue. We shook hands and exchanged the usual few words. Roy asked after my wife. I asked after his health. His face was the same as it always was, broad, unhurried, not exactly closed but not advertising anything either. After 28 years working beside the men, I still could not always tell what was going on behind it. I had learned to assume it was more than I thought. He went back to the room ahead of me. When I took my seat and found him, he was over by the piano, a decent upright Yamaha that the Civic Center kept for these occasions, positioned to the left of the stage area, adjusting the bench with the kind of careful, methodical attention he brought to most things. Someone from the facilities team, I supposed. Making sure the hired pianist would be comfortable. I thought nothing more of it and opened the program. The speeches began at 7:30. The Federation chairman, then the deputy commissioner, then, and here the evening took on its familiar middle-aged restlessness, people shifting in their chairs and reaching for their glasses, Councillor Dennis Fawcett, who represented the Civic Authority on the Welfare Board and who had been introduced as a great supporter of the service, which I had always taken to mean he enjoyed the dinners. Fawcett was not a cruel man, I should say. He was not even a thoughtless one, exactly. He was a man who had learned over a long career that a well-placed remark could fill a room and move it forward, and he used that skill the way some men use a handshake, automatically, without much consideration of who was on the receiving end. He was perhaps 3 minutes into his remarks when he noticed Roy, who had moved back to the piano and was making some small adjustment to the music stand, straightening it, I thought, or setting it at the right angle. Fawcett paused. He smiled. And then he said, into the microphone and therefore to every one of the 80-odd people in the room, "Is that our man at the piano? Are you going to give us something, then? Play us something fitting, a march, perhaps. Something for a man of your station." There was laughter. Polite, easy, the kind of laughter a room produces when the person at the microphone is clearly expecting it. The counselor spread his hands in cheerful invitation. Someone at a nearby table said, "Go on, then." I found myself looking at Roy with the slight embarrassment of someone who knows the subject of a joke well enough to wince on his behalf. Roy did not seem embarrassed. He looked at Fawcett for a moment, a long, level look that I recognized from 28 years of working alongside him. It was not hostile. It was simply the look of a man deciding something. Then he looked at the piano. Then, without any visible deliberation, he set down the music stand. He had been straightening it, I had been right about that, and he sat down. I assumed, in that moment, that he intended to play a few notes and sit back down. A good-natured playing along. Roy had never been a man to make a scene, and this would not be the moment he started. I settled back in my chair and reached for my wine. He adjusted the bench. Not by feel, not approximately, He adjusted it the way a person adjusts something they have adjusted 10,000 times before, both hands on the sides, a specific, practiced movement that set it exactly where he wanted it and nowhere else. I noticed that. I filed it away without quite knowing why. He placed his hands in his lap. He sat for a moment in the kind of stillness that is not hesitation but preparation. The room was still murmuring, still smiling at whatever had just happened. Fawcett had begun to speak again. Then Roy's hands came up to the keys. The first chord of Schumann's Widmung, in Liszt's great solo arrangement, the one that opens like a door being pushed slowly and surely open, is not a quiet thing. It is not a march. It does not say, filling time or, playing along or, something for a man of my station. It is a chord that means exactly one thing, which is, I have something to tell you, and I need you to be still. The room went still. Not all at once. It happened by degrees, the way silence spreads through a space when the thing making the sound is real enough to demand it. The murmuring stopped. The clink of a glass being set down. Fawcett's voice, mid-sentence, trailing into nothing. And then just the piano, and Roy, and 80 people who had stopped doing whatever they were doing and found themselves attending to something they had not bargained for. I have never been a musical man in any formal sense. I can tell you when something is right, the way anyone can, but I could not tell you why. What I can tell you is that Roy played with a gravity that was simply not available to people who were performing. He was not performing. He was not, to use the word Fawcett had offered, playing. He was doing something that looked, from where I was sitting, rather more like keeping a promise. The piece moved through its middle passages with a steadiness that was almost physical. You felt it in the chest, in the base of the throat. The melody would climb and open, then turn back on itself with a tenderness that was almost too direct to sit with comfortably. A woman 2 tables to my left had stopped turning the stem of her wine glass. The deputy commissioner was leaning forward with his elbows on the table and his hands folded, looking at the piano the way you look at something you were not expecting to find important. I watched Roy's face. It was the same face. But it was doing something I had not seen it do in 28 years. It was not closed. It was carrying something. Something old, something he had been carrying for a long time, and he was setting it down here, in this room, in this piece of music, and the setting down looked both necessary and unbearable. I knew, by then, what the piece might be. I had not known he played, not like this, not at all, truly, but I knew enough of his life to make a guess at why he had chosen this one, of all the pieces he might have chosen. His daughter, Caitlin. She had been 29 when she died. A blood clot, entirely without warning, on a Thursday afternoon in March 11 years ago. She had been engaged to a man named Pete Holroyd, a good man, a paramedic. I had met him at the funeral. The wedding had been planned for the June of that year. Roy had told me once, in the car after a long shift, that he had been teaching himself a piece to play at the reception. He had played piano since his 20s, alone, never for anyone. He had wanted to play it for her. He did not say what the piece was. He did not say much more about it at all, and I had not asked, because Roy was a man who told you the important things once and trusted you to hold them. The last section of the Widmung is a return. The melody comes back changed by everything that has happened to it, deepened, and it resolves not in triumph but in something quieter and more permanent. Roy played it the way a man reads a letter he has read many times. The last chord he held for a long moment, the sustain pedal keeping it alive in the room, and the room let him. Then the sound faded. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Not a chair, not a glass, not a program rustled. It was the kind of silence that feels earned, the kind that costs the room something to maintain, and that the room maintains anyway because the alternative is unthinkable. The deputy commissioner was first. He stood without any visible decision, the way you stand when your body has arrived somewhere before your mind has. Then, around the room, others. Not the usual gathering of a raffle night response, this was person by person, quiet and certain, the way a field of candles takes a light. Someone near the back was wiping their face with the flat of their hand and not troubling to hide it. I stood. My loft conversion superintendent stood, and I do not think he had any more words left about the loft. Roy had taken his hands from the keys and placed them back in his lap. He sat for a moment longer. Then he stood, moved the bench back to exactly where it had been, and turned to face the room with the same expression he'd brought to straightening the music stand. Unhurried. Not performing gratitude. Not performing anything. Just present, in the way he had always been present, in the way that had taken me 28 years to understand was itself a form of rare and particular dignity. Counselor Fawcett was still seated. He rose, finally, after most of the room had been standing for some time. He did not speak. He opened his mouth once, and then he closed it again, and he brought his hands together like everyone else, though his applause was slower and something had gone out of his face that had been there before. I do not say this to punish him. I say it because it is true, and because that expression, a man who has asked for a small joke and received instead something that realigned the evening, is one I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I made my way to Roy when the room had settled back into itself. He was over by the fire door where I had first found him, jacket back on, his large hands quiet at his sides. I said his name. He looked at me. I said, "That was Whitmung." He said, "Yes." I said, "You were going to play it at the wedding." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'd been waiting for a room that asked." I thought about Fawcett's remark, "Play us something fitting, something for a man of your station." I thought about the 11 years of that piece sitting inside Roy, waiting for a room that asked, and finding one here, in a charity fundraiser with borrowed candelabras and a cold buffet, because a man at a microphone had wanted an easy laugh. The room had asked. It had not known it was asking. But the music had answered on behalf of all of them, and the room had received it, and something in that exchange was more honest than anything else that happened in the Alderton Civic Function room that evening. I have been back to the Federation dinner twice since. Roy comes still. I see him arrive with the same unhurried quiet, check the same fire doors, adjust the same chairs. He does not play again, and no one has asked him to. But I notice, now, that when he passes the piano he rests one hand briefly on the side of the case, just for a moment, just a touch, before moving on. I used to wonder what a man of his particular stillness was carrying through all those years. I do not wonder anymore.